Hi, today we are going to have a short lecture, probably about 5 to 6 minutes, over imperialism. That took place from 1850 to 1914. And one of the big things that we talk about is the major attraction of colonies for the imperialist nations, not just about their wealth or their natural resources, but also their strategic locations in controlling both land and waterway trade routes. One of the big things that helped with this was the Industrial Revolution, advances in naval technology, and being able to make those quick trips between homeland and colonies. Europeans could dispatch colonial administrators and armies for these lands, and they were able to bring back agricultural, mineral, and natural resources. So, what? Explain imperialism and the impact on the modern world. So one of it is it's a stronger nation taking over a weaker nation. And before we had gone on break, one of the acronyms that I gave you was M.E.N.I.E, and using M.E.N.I.E with the acronym ESPN, our favorite sports channel. So it's economically the need for those raw and natural resources for these growing imperializing countries. The S is for socially. That's this missionary impulse, this spreading of the Christian religion, westernizing, the idea of culture superiority over another culture, this idea of social Darwinism, which we've talked about in the past, the survival of the fittest from philosopher Herbert Spencer. Then the P for politically. That's where we look at kind of colonial protectorate, sphere of influence, economic imperialism. These are different ways that countries could kind of control those nations. So when you talk about colony, that's really talking about a governing power who's internally taking over that country. A protectorate, that country that's being imperialized actually has its own government, and kind of controls things. But again, the imperializing nation, the more powerful nation, is involved in that. When we talk about a sphere of influence, that's really just about trading and having exclusive investment in that country. And then the last one that we have, economic imperialism, is that is more. It's almost like what happened with Hawaii. It's when it's controlled by private business interests. In Hawaii, one of the big ones was the Dole Company. I'm sure a lot of you have had bananas and different fruits from Dole. And then finally, the last one is nationalism. That's the N. This is the foreign perspective versus the native perspective. Foreign perspective meaning we're more powerful. We have the ability. We are trying to improve you. Almost like in the movie that we watched, Rabbit Proof Fence. The native's perspective is that you're coming in, you are changing their culture, and it's not that they have asked you for this benefit, asked you for this help. It's the fact that you have tried to assimilate them into a culture that they don't necessarily want to be part of. And so that's what we refer to as ESPN, economically, socially, politically, and nationalism. More often than not, especially because of the industrialization, the unit that we had before this, it's really about a more technologically superior nation. With that, it's also a nation that has superior military. Probably going to have superiority when it comes to industrialization. Excuse me. The idea of investments and the idea that they have different things like the Maxim gun, which was basically kind of like the first machine gun, or even the idea of having medicines, quinine, that really helped in some of those humid and different nations where there's a lot of different insects and stuff like that. And again, the whole idea behind this imperialization and a sad reality of the situation, it's the exploitation of a weaker nation and taking what you want and not actually giving anything in return. Some of the countries that are involved, just so we kind of have an idea, and a lot of these countries, they come from back from our last semester exploration unit. When you talk about Great Britain and France, if you look down there too, kind of towards the bottom down here, you have your Spain and Portugal. So all of these countries kind of being involved in that. The areas, nations, territories that were imperialized, we did our map when we talked about Africa. The fact that when we look at Africa, basically, you have the entire continent of what I can't remember. I think if I remember right, it was 54 nations that were taken over by European nations. The only two independent